Firstly, I'd really like to thank the City of Canning to invite us here today. This is exactly what Lotterywest should be doing. We should be getting out to our grassroots community groups and talking about our grants. It's really important you get an opportunity to tell me what your needs and issues are, and hopefully I respond. The whole point of tonight is that you're probably interested in getting some Lotterywest money. Why wouldn't you, getting a grant? So hopefully I'll answer some of your questions. At the end of it, you may still have some questions because I can't cover everything, but my colleague Linda and I will do some speed dating, if you like. So we will, this presentation is about 20 minutes and the Healthway one's about 15 minutes. Then there's a short break and then Catherine's going to present, but in that time, if any of you would like to ask some questions about your individual ideas or projects, we're happy to talk to you. So how does that sound? Pretty good? Okay. Next slide, thanks. Okay, so who are we? Who are Lotterywest? Well, we've been around since 1932. We were established during the Great Depression. We were basically established to regulate the lottery of the day and also to provide support for the charities, which is obviously during this really challenging time. It was really important for Lotterywest to step up. We're the only state-based lottery in Australia. We're very, very lucky to have one. We often get people from other states trying to get hold of our money and we promptly tell them, no, you're not from WA. So it's obviously a means of presenting lots of money and benefits and prizes back into the WA community. So it's really great that we've got it. Where does the money go? So you can see on the graph about 50% is returned in prizes. Obviously, we've got to give incentive for people to play lotto, so we do that by the prizes. 30% is in grants back to the community, and 20% is operational costs, mainly staffing. We employ, I always say between 200 and 300, but I know that's a big variance. So I don't know, Lindy, do you know exactly how many we employ?
I always say 200. So
oh, okay. Anyway, we take up 2 big floors of a big building, so. There you go. Now, all grants go to our board, every single one of them. So if you apply for a Lotterywest grant and get through the process, you will be approved by our board, and that's either a approved or a not supported. So be assured that that's where the decision making is done. Our job as assessors to try and put your application in the best light or give it the best chance to get funding. And after the board approval, it goes to our minister, which happens to be the Premier. Next slide, please. So Lotterywest and Healthway combined forces in 2018. We're both grant organisations, so it made sense to increase synergies and efficiencies by bringing both organisations together. However, they do operate quite differently, and they have their own legal entities and own legislation. Lotterywest, as I said, the minister is the Premier, and Healthway, their minister is the Minister of Health. But we work together under common CEO, and we also have a common board chairman, Professor Peter Clinken, who's also the chief scientist in WA. And I think there's 2 to 3 common board members. So yeah, we're working more and more together to do co-funding and to combine our resources for more efficiencies and better grants. Next slide, please. So, thinking about applying for a grant. So what I'm going to go through is how you'd be eligible for a Lotterywest grant and how we might formulate your ideas, how you fit into our funding framework, and then what the sort of process is. So that's what I'll go through. So next slide, please. First thing we have to work out is whether your organisation is eligible. So there's 2 sort of tiers of eligibility, if you like. One is your organisation eligible and whether your purpose or your idea is eligible. So if we look at the organisation, we provide funding to 2 types of organisations essentially. Local government authorities like the City of Canning, and also not-for-profits. So if your organisation is registered with the ACNC, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, or is a registered incorporated organisation, then you can get funding from us. If you are a different organisational entity like a trust or company guaranteed by accompanied by guarantee. We do provide some grants, however they are looked at by our policy team on an individual basis. The other thing to point out is if you are a not-for-profit that is not registered for GST, is anyone here from a not-for-profit not registered? Okay. You are only entitled, or you're not incorporated, you're only entitled to $15,000 as a maximum. However, we have just introduced that you can be auspiced by a larger not-for-profit or indeed your LGA. So that's a way that you can actually obtain more than $15,000. There's lots of information on how that works on our website. So if that is your organisation, then you can either talk to me or jump on there and get some information. Next slide, please. So what can we support? With this, I'm talking about what is an eligible purpose. So we fund charitable and benevolent purposes. So we have to make sure that the grant that we're awarding results in the public benefit for the WA community. It's all about what's the benefit to your community that you're bringing with your grant. And I'm also going to talk to you about our funding framework, which we call the Community Investment Framework. And we need to be able to draw a direct link between the outcome of your application and one of the outcomes we're seeking from our investment framework. So when you're looking at what's the benefit of your grant, you have to be able to draw a line between some Lotterywest outcomes that we've put forward as what we want to achieve and your grant. And that will become more apparent when I show you the Community Investment Framework. Next slide, please. Okay, probably best to also start with what we don't support. We don't support projects taking place outside WA, as I pointed out before. We're a WA government organisation, so we're not going to fund things that are outside our state. We don't fund retrospective expenditure. So if you've had a really great program and it fits our community investment framework, but you've already had it running and you've always spent the money, we're not going to give you the money. So anything you've planned has to be approved by Lotterywest prior to you actually spending any of the money, and we do check that. We don't fund contingency. However, that we do sometimes fund big infrastructure costs, and particularly in the building industry, that's caused some issues because there's so much heat in that market that prices have gone through the roof. So for infrastructure costs, we have introduced now, I think it's a 20% contingency, but for most of you, for your projects, there is no contingency cost. However, you can put in between a 10 to 15% admin cost. So that's important to know. What's the other thing? We don't fund ongoing operational costs. So these are your business as usual costs. If your organisation is not financially viable to run its core programs, then that's not Lotterywest's place. Otherwise, we'd be funding every organisation. So does that make sense? What we fund has to be a value-add project, which is outside of your core programming. Sorry. We don't fund religious activities, although welfare and community service activities of faith-based groups can be funded. And I know there are some faith-based organisations here, and we know that most faith-based organisations do charitable and benevolent work, which is not linked to just the members of their church. So that's absolutely fine. The other thing we don't fund, sorry for all the sporting clubs that are here, we don't fund competitive sporting activities. We recognise that sport is fantastic. It's fantastic for physical health, it's fantastic for mental health, but for Lotterywest, it's not considered benevolent or charitable enough to actually get funding just for sport's sake. Does that make sense? You can sometimes get some funding if you're running an activity that your sport, it's just, your sport is the vehicle. So to give you an example of this, because it's a little bit difficult, there was a football club in the city of Swan, and they used to have a lot of Aboriginal people belong to their football club, and they drifted away, and they wanted to run a sort of one-day Indigenous festival to bring these people back and get them back interested in the club. So they ran this festival that had lots of Aboriginal dancing, Aboriginal food, Aboriginal culture, they did have a football match, but that wasn't the main purpose of the day. So does that make sense to you all? We don't fund medical research, and the reason we don't do that, I'm going to put this down so I don't whack it. The reason we don't fund medical research is that Lotterywest gives a massive grant to the health department, which covers this off for us. So that's a big, we give them 20 million, I think, $20 million, and we go, you know health better than us. It's your jurisdiction, so over to you. So when we do get health projects through, we say, no, you have to go to the health department. We don't fund the GST component of items purchased by the grant. So if you put in an application to Healthway and Lotterywest, or Lotterywest, you need to put it ex-GST. The budget will ask for ex-GST, and of course you can claim back. And the other thing we don't fund is projects or initiatives that should be funded by other government departments. So we fund things that we think are Lotterywest space. Next slide, please. Grant limits. You can't apply for under $3,000. So even if you want less than $3,000, you're going to have $3,000, okay? And like I said before, if you're not registered for GST or unincorporated, you can only ask for $15,000 unless auspiced by a larger not-for-profit. Otherwise, there's no upper limit. However, I will tell you later that we do look at reasonable requests and we look at value for money, and there's a whole set of other criteria that we would use. So if you put in this a massive inflated budget, we're going to be calling you to justify it. The last thing to mention with this is Lotterywest is a complementary funder. What we mean by this is we won't fund the whole amount. In years go by, Lotterywest used to fund some projects by the whole amount. We now say, no, we want other people to put money on the table. We want other people to put skin in the game. So whether that's other funding bodies or partners that you've developed, and we also realise that some organisations have very little funding. Financial capacity is really minimum. So the cash component can be quite small, but we just got to see that you want to put some money in. And of course, there's always in-kind contribution. So that's obviously taken on board as well. So if you can only put in $1,000, but there's $3,000 in kind, that is considered favourable when we look at who else is putting money into this idea. Make sense? Next slide, please, Daniel. We work in a way which is called a community development approach. Now, pretty much all this means is that the idea comes from you, and you might not know how it fits that well with our funding framework yet, but we can help you do that. If the purpose of the grant is charitable and benevolent, and it fits within our framework, we can help you polish that idea up into a way that you will have more success at applying. So that's why we ask you to call us, pitch your idea to us, and we can say, yeah, no, that fits, that's all right, or perhaps have you thought about this, or you need to partner with somebody else, or we can provide some advice to make your life so much easier if you give us a call. The other thing that means is we're not that grant maker that if you forget to put something in, or you don't put as much information that we need, we're not going to just bin your application and go, not enough information. We're going to call you and go, oh, Pete, got your application. Look, I'm a bit unclear about, who's the target audience, or who's going to benefit, or how you're going to implement your plan. So we will talk to you, and you can talk through your ideas. So that's what we call a developmental grant maker. We often like groups to partner with other people. That might be other groups in your sector, or to demonstrate that you've reached out to other organisations to find out what they're doing and what they think about your idea. We are based in Subiaco, but we travel extensively. So for instance, my region and Linda's region is the Great Southern, Southwest and the Southeast Metro. So you're my people, okay? So we like to get to know our stakeholders in our region, and we get out to the community so we can see all the great work that you're doing and work out what maybe the issues are in your community. Next slide, please. So this is, what we're talking through now is our community investment framework. So we support grants that contribute towards achieving our priority areas. Next slide, please. So our vision at Lotterywest is to build a better and healthier WA together with our communities. So the community investment framework is our roadmap to achieve this vision. It's also what we use to measure the social impact of our grants. So it performs two functions. Now the 5 priority areas, and there were some leaflets at the back, so inclusive, thriving community, connected cultural experiences, protected sustainable ecosystems, smart innovative society, active healthy people. So when you're filling out your application form or your idea, you might think that you belong in all of those. Your idea is so good that it fits. Doesn't matter, you actually can assign it to the one that you think it fits best. I'm not going to go through the whole community investment framework, but the next slide does bring up some actual outcomes that we're looking for under each of those priority areas. So that might explain it a little bit more. And also you might get an understanding of how you need to link your outcomes to what our outcomes need to be. So you'll be able to see that by looking at the outcomes. Next slide, please. So that's it there. The handouts at the back had a copy of that. If you go on our website, you'll come across this as well. So the priority areas across the top. The active healthy people is more the domain of Healthway. However, Lotterywest, Healthway is under the Lotterywest banner, so we do operate in that space. Is that a little bit hard to read from you? Yeah, so you're better off looking at the hard copies. But you can see, like if I just use the first pillar as an example, inclusive, thriving community. So this is grants that support the diversity of Western Australians to actively engage in community life. So that's the priority area, and the outcomes that we're trying to achieve is more people have a stronger sense of belonging in their community, vulnerability and disadvantage reduced across our community, and raise community connection and participation. So if you've got a program or a festival that you want to bring people together, make them feel belonging to a community, then that's the pillar for you. The next one that is really popular, so inclusive thriving community is really where most of our grants come in. The next one that is most popular is connected cultural experiences. So bringing people together through the arts, heritage and cultural activities. And the outcomes are our community is connected through the arts and cultural activities. Indigenous heritage and culture is respected, acknowledged and embraced. West Australian cultural heritage is shared and preserved. So if you're a multicultural group and you want to make sure that your community feels a sense of belonging and wants to maintain your heritage and celebrate your heritage, then that's perhaps an area that you can put a grant in. Okay, so these priority areas, there's 3 types of grant programs. The only one that we're really going to talk about today is the grassroots and community-led. That is the crux of where grassroots and community organisations fit. The second one, developing solutions, that's more where Lotterywest identify a need in society or the community by doing its knowledge gathering and its database searches and its talking to people. That's where we do a targeted strategic approach out to the community rather than it coming from the community to us. So an example of that one is, so Derby, the LGA, has got no money and lots of problems. So Lotterywest, in consultation with them, has decided that we will be strategic in our approach and work with the LGA, the Derby, Shire of Derby, to implement some programs in their town. Does that make sense? That sort of more strategic approach, direct approach. And the third one is, that's what our board does, community legacy grants. So that's a large amount of money. They don't award them very often, but they're often for what they call legacy projects that involving large amounts of money, and they talk about those for 3 or 4 or 5 years before they actually award one. This is place-based, people-driven or organisation-driven, where you come to us with your ideas. And that's pretty much the best space for Lotterywest to be, okay? So that's where we can make a difference. So you come to us with your idea, we will work with you to understand how it connects with our priorities. Most of you will have a pretty good idea anyway, but we can just help you formulate that a little bit better. Our applications are open all year round. However, you need to allow 4 months. So if you're running an event in August, you need to have your application in by April, okay? Or if you've got a project that you want to kick off in the next financial year, you've had to have your application in yesterday. So you need to make sure it takes 4 months for it to move through our system. So, and in fact, if you put a date of your festival or when your project starts and it's within that 4 months, it won't let you actually add it. So that's really important. So you need to plan your application. Next slide, please. Oh, applications open all year round. Okay, this is just it's called a program logic model, and there's a pad of program logic at the back. All this is trying to do is, with Lotterywest, we're now a outcomes framework. So we want to know, people used to come to Lotterywest and go, we want a bus, we want this, we want that. So they were things. And now we're saying, don't talk to us about things, tell us about what you're going to achieve. What's the outcome of your project? So to do that, you have to identify the need that you're trying to fulfill. And the next thing you have to work out is what's your endpoint, what is the outcome of what the benefit to the community, and then you put in those other things along the way, which is inputs, activities, how are you going to get there? From there to there, how are you going to get there? That's called an outcome framework. And some people find this really useful, this little program logic. And again, this is on our website. So if I was going to give you an example, perhaps you're a group working with seniors and you've worked out that the seniors' level of IT skills is wanting, that there's a lot of seniors out there who just don't know how. So the app recently, the COVID app, so many seniors can't download it, can't use it. So maybe you've identified that. So you go, okay, well, there's a need. They've identified the need. So what is the outcome I'm trying to achieve? Well, what you're trying to achieve is that seniors are empowered and are confident to use IT to be able to do activities of daily living. So of course you've got your need, you've got your outcome. How are you going to get there? You need to design a program, an education program. You need some money. You need a facilitator. You need a venue. And so you get that process. Make sense? Okay, next slide, please. So what we look for, okay, I've banged on about it enough. You need to connect to our community investment framework. Okay, fundamental. If it doesn't fit our framework, we won't look at it. However, it's not difficult to fit our framework. On top of that though, everything almost fits our framework, to be honest, but there's another level of criteria that we put across. Once you fit our framework, we look at what is the level of benefit to the community, what is the value for money, what is your organisational capacity. So if you put an application in and you're in negative financial balance, then we're going to say these guys haven't got the capacity to run this grant, or they haven't got the governance to run this grant. So we look at that. And the fourth thing, merit of proposal. Is this a worthwhile, benevolent, charitable purpose that's going to benefit their community? Appropriate and realistic budget, value for money. I've already said that. Certainly put in what is required. Don't, if it's going to cost you this amount of money, don't be shy to put it in. It is what it is. But if we think that's too much, we'll ask for extra information. Why your organisation? So you need to, in some ways, validate the need and validate why your organisation is best placed to do it. So if you said that, seniors don't know how to use IT, and then I went to the peak body of seniors and they said, seniors are all across it. I will want to know how you got your information. Who's your target audience? Who have you asked? How have you identified that this is a need in your community? The other thing I want to know Is your organisation the best organisation to do this? Have you spoken to other organisations? Is this your place? Is this where you operate? Or are you a conservation group and you're wanting to do a children's program? Which that could probably work actually. But you know, you can see where you'd need to justify why you're doing that particular program. If you're doing something that's a little bit off field, well, obviously you've partnered up with somebody else. Maybe you have partnered up with a children's organisation, who knows? But you need to justify that, okay? Next slide, please. All right, so if you've had Lotterywest funding before, you would have what we call a BP number, business partner number. If you haven't, then you're starting from scratch. Now, there's some things that you need to gather before you start applying. However, if you started the application process, you can stop and save it at any time. You're not going to lose your information. But what you need is your constitution, your bank account, an audited financial statement. If you've not a big organisation, then you may have an accountant sign that off. You need some referees. You need to have it signed by your legal authority for your organisation. And if that legal authority is not the person that's doing the business as usual, you can get a delegation of authority. But these are all the things you need. Referees are important, so you need a couple of people, not your Member of Parliament, because they don't count. Very important people, but they don't count for us. And you also need to provide budgets and quotes and an annual report which also includes your AGM minutes, just so we can check the sort of governance. The next stage, if everything's in order, it comes across to the grants assessment. We have a lot of projects sitting in what we call our bin. It's a bad term because it's not a bin. Folder, if you like. So sometimes we get really busy. So we have to work our way through the assessments. It takes a while. Our board only meets once a month. So then it goes to the next board meeting and then it has to be approved by the board and then go to the Premier. So it's actually quite a long process. So that's why it takes so long. Next slide, please. And the next one. Okay, this is just a couple of grant examples and you can see they're actually in the different priority areas. So we've got a grant to Zonta House to support a 12-month education program to increase awareness and improve responses to family and domestic violence. Then we've got one in the Connected Cultural Experiences, which is the Indian Society of WA. And then we've got one in Protected Ecosystems and one in Smart Innovative Society. So that's just to give you some examples. Next slide, please. And then the next one, I think we've got, that's it. Okay, hopefully that's answered some of your questions. I know that some of you will want to pitch your own idea at this stage and you may get the opportunity to do that because we have a 20-minute break and then I'll probably finish early. So please come to us. Just be mindful if there's quite a few wanting to talk to us that ask you a couple of questions that you need and then you'll have to make room for somebody else. So that's sort of inclusive, targeting people that, you know, maybe, you know...
The whole idea is